Today, I'd like to speak about a lot of these posts I've been seeing in my feeds about the reverse repo account, RRP. Um, I know it's difficult to say because these people who say this is so bad, they don't actually articulate why it's bad. And what I'd like to say is, I think there's an alternative explanation that makes sense, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So here's the reverse repurchase agreement account at the Fed. And as you can see, in 2021, we went up and it became $2.4 trillion, and now it's all the way down to 33 billion or whatever. So a huge drop. But as you can see, it wasn't really that big before this. And again, people are saying that this is very negative. I guess it's because they think that liquidity is going down. But if you look at M2, liquidity is going up. So the best measure of liquidity is M2. This is representative of money that we can buy things with, okay? And so as you can see, liquidity has been going up in our country. So what about this RRP? So I want you to notice here that it's starting in early 2021, key point. And here's our favorite chart of the Fed balance sheet, okay? So what you're looking at here, you can see in 2020, right in early 2020, we started with QE again. And we threw in, well, $3 trillion. And then over the next year and a half, it looks like, we threw in another $2 trillion. So $3 trillion was thrown in early 2020, okay? So how does QE actually work? You have to understand how the plumbing of our financial system works. So QE is that the government goes into their GSIBs, their globally systemically important banks, and they then say, we'll buy your bonds, all your bonds, whatever you want. And they turn around and they sell them to the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve gives them cash. Critical point, okay? So now the GSIBs have all this cash, $3 trillion in early 2021 or 2020. So what does the Fed worry about? Well, as you all know, we're the reserve currency. And the Federal Reserve, I don't know if it's a policy, but it's a stated belief that they don't believe that the reserve currency can go to negative interest rates. And remember something, during COVID, there were a lot of countries that went to negative interest rates. Not like Japan, which was like for 23 years, but still, countries went to negative interest rates. So think of what the situation is. The Fed is throwing huge amounts of money, $3 trillion, into these GSIBs. They have to do something with that cash. And notice how fast it came in. So there's no way they're investing it, lending it out, and so forth at the speed that would need to be done so it could go someplace. So what was the Fed's worry? The Fed worried that the GSIBs would turn around with this $3 trillion and buy treasuries with it. Short-term treasuries, doesn't matter, short, long, but short-term treasuries. And if $3 trillion was directed to buy short-term treasuries, guess what would happen? We would go to negative interest rates. So what the Fed decided to do was, why don't we have this reverse repo account? And what we'll do is we will pay equal or a little bit more than they can make by buying treasuries. So now the banks had a place they could go and get their money right away. It's a reverse repo, basically one day. Sometimes it can be 3 days, but usually one day. So you can get your money back the next day. And so what the Fed actually did was they created a facility to take in this huge amount of liquidity that the government still has some kind of control over without driving our interest rates into negative territory. That's what this is about. So I would argue the Fed did a good job. Well, they did the QE for the COVID. Whether you think that's good, bad, or indifferent, all right? We can argue about, they're going to write books about this forever, okay? But their whole point is we do not want negative interest rate. So if you notice, we had the $3 trillion come in, and of course, the banks are lending it out, buying things and so forth. But over time, it turned out to be $5 trillion, and about half of the money ended up in the reverse repos before the banks could start doing other things with it. Now, once the Fed started to raise interest rates and other instruments went up in yield, then the banks didn't have to buy treasuries. They could buy multiple different kinds of vehicles to invest the money in, and thereby they didn't need the money, the interest that the Fed was paying. They could get higher interest rates by going and investing it elsewhere. And that's what they did. So I understand people look at it and they say, well, this must be a negative. We're at 2.5 trillion, now we're down to nothing. But really, it was put there for a specific reason. And as you know from the chart that we just looked at, the Fed has also been, I think, fairly successful in QT, taking it from 9 trillion down to 6.5 trillion dollars, okay? So the RRP, the reverse repo account, was put in for a specific reason. That reason doesn't exist anymore. Remember we had the BTFP when we had the Silicon Valley Bank problem? It's over, it's gone. There's no money in it anymore. It was a facility there to liquefy the banks at 100 cents on the dollar, now it's gone. The RRP was there to sop up all this liquidity so we don't have negative interest rates. So what do you think in the comments? Like and follow, and thank you for following me.